Today I'm reviewing 8 hands that I tagged during a recent 5-10 no limit session in GTO Wizard. If you want the full live play session, it's also on the channel, but this review should stand on its own as well. So I have the first hand pulled up here. We open limp small blind with queen 6 suited, face a 3x ISO and call. We check the flop, villain goes b50 and we call. Turns the jack of spades, we check, villain goes b33, we call again, and river is the 8 of spades, we check, opponent checks back. So this might seem like a pretty standard hand, but I was a little bit curious about the turn call and also if we potentially have any leads on the river. So let's just review this one pretty quickly to make sure that everything was fine. I have it pulled up here. Small blind is pure checking the flop. It looks like the optimal size for big blind is b40, but let's just edit this to b50 since that's what our opponent actually did. b50 is a perfectly fine size, obviously. And if we look at our queen 6 suited combos, they pure call. Turn, I believe, was the jack of spades. I don't anticipate having any leads here, so we go for a pure check. And here it looks like in position actually wants to go for an overbet with a pretty high frequency, about half of their range here. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to kind of line check what actually happened in the hands. And so let's just put in b33. It's worth noting that in position's pot share is 55.2% with the overbet, and it goes all the way down to 52.2% when they use a B33 size. And so this is actually a pretty big strategic error for in position. But let's see how we respond against that B33 size. Yeah, we pretty much pure call the queen 6 suited. We can throw in some raises as well sometimes. And then the river was the 8 of spades. And it looks like we actually do get a little bit of leading here. We can see that a flush makes up 10% of our range here. A straight makes up 3%. And if we look at kind of the same thing for in position, flush is only 5% of their range. And so we have a pretty significant kind of nut range advantage here. It's not so significant in the sense that big blind never has the nuts, because they certainly do, I would assume. Yeah, but it is significant enough that we want some small percentage of leads. That said, queen 6 suited, pretty much a pure check here. So yeah, I feel good about the way I played the hand. But I think we can learn that in this line, it's actually pretty important for the big blind to have a big bet size on the turn here. So let's move on to the next hand. All right, here we open 7-6 suited in the button. The big blind defends. And if you didn't watch the previous video, there's a full small blind ante for each player. So there's, yeah, a pretty big ante in the pot. So just keep that in mind going forward. I set up the ranges to account for that. In game, I decided to play this flop spot with a big bet or check. And so I chose to check this combo. We turn trips, I decide to delay c-bet for pot, and our opponent folds. So again, pretty simple and straightforward hand, but I just want to kind of check my flop and turn strategies. So here it does in fact look like in position gets a B155 sizing. So yeah, I feel pretty good about playing an overbet on this flop with bet size, and 7-6 of diamonds, pure checks. We can occasionally bet if we do have a backdoor flush draw. So we do go for the check. The turn is the 6 of hearts. Out of position gets a B68 probe size, but once they check, this is pretty interesting. Our delay c-bet size is only B25. One thing I do like to do is that when I make a play based on my in-game logic, I like to see how much pot share I'm losing by not taking what GTO Wizard suggests. So here we can see that in position's pot share is 60.5. with a B25 delay size. And so let's see how that changes if we go for a B100 delay size. So actually our pot share goes up. So I'm not quite sure why, but sometimes GTO Wizard actually doesn't show you the optimal size, even though that's what it's set up to do. Sometimes you do have to actually tinker around a little bit. So let's just double check our combo. Interestingly, it seems like we do want to check back a fair amount with 7-6 here. I guess because with the 7, we block a fair amount of our opponent's continues, namely like 8-7 combos. I guess some 9-7 combos too. And we obviously want some strong hands in our check back range on river. And so yeah, I guess obviously betting is okay, but probably pretty important to check more often than I have been checking here with a hand like this, just because there's a good amount of hands that would fold against a B100 that we are likely to get some sort of bet in against on the river. So that is actually a good takeaway here from this hand. And let's move on to the next one. All right, here we have Jack 10 off in the cutoff. We open for 4x and the big blind calls. And here I choose to go B67 with my bet size, including Jack 10 with a club. Our opponent calls. And here was, I guess, my main first question. I believe my strategy in game was to usually check this combo back, but bet it a third of the time, and I rolled high, so I chose to bet it this time. I am more likely to bet with Jack 10 with a heart here, I think. And I chose, I think, around a 2E size, so we'll just double check the sizing as well. So I did go for the bet. Opponent jams, we fold. I think this is a fold, but might as well check it. And let's take a look at this hand in Wizard now. So Wizard actually prefers a B25 sizing. This might be different if ranges were different in a non-big ante format, but let's just take a look and see how much pot share we're losing by going for a B67 size. Here, cutoff's pot share is 65.2. And here it's 64.4. So we actually do lose a somewhat decent amount. So this is a good takeaway on a King 9 deuce board in this configuration, just going B25 with range. It's a easier strategy to implement as well. But let's just go through the hand as it played out. If we did go B67 and we get a call, turns the 8 of hearts. It looks like B100 is the correct sizing. And if we look at our Jack 10 off combos, if you've forgotten, I have the Jack of spades, 10 of clubs. It seems like, yeah, we are actually betting. It looks more like 15% of the time, but it is fine to bet this combo at a low-ish frequency. And also, as I suspected, the Jack 10 off with a heart tends to barrel a lot more often. That's a very common heuristic when you kind of like either pick up a backdoor flush draw or pick up a blocker to the backdoor flush draw. Generally, those are the combos that want to prioritize barreling versus either the front door flush draw or blocking the front door flush draw. So it's good to see that sort of heuristic apply here. And let's take a look at what happens against a jam. Yeah, we do just, we're just not getting pot odds to call with Jack 10. So glad to see a fold there. There's one more thing I would like to take a look at in this hand, which is that if we were to go B25 on flop, because going forward, I plan on making that adjustment. And I like to take a moment to look at big blind's response. They go for a small raise a pretty hefty amount of the time. But if they call and we get this same turn card, let's take a look at how to play Jack 10 in this sort of situation. So yeah, here it does look like we go for the overbet because out of position range is going to be significantly weaker since we bet so small on the flop and we are still strong and uncapped. And yeah, here we can bet a lot of the Jack 10 combos. It seems like the main ones that prefer checking are the ones that don't block either of the flush draws, basically. So yeah, some good takeaways there, and let's move on to the next hand. All right, here we have pocket sevens in the big blind. Under the gun opened, small blind flatted, and we flatten the big blind. Flop is ace ace 3 rainbow, and in position goes b25. We call. Turns the king of diamonds, goes check check. River's the 3 of spades. I remember at this point thinking that I was near bottom of range, and so wondering if I should be bluffing this combo. I decided to bluff it occasionally, but not this time. So I checked, and opponent checked back. So let's take a look. So one cool thing is that GTO Wizard did recently add multi-way situations, and so I have the spot pulled up here. Small blind pure checks, big blind presumably pure checks, and here in position goes for b25. And then after the small blind folds, we are in the big blind with pocket sevens. This is a pure call, would be a pretty big mistake to fold here. And we get the king of diamonds turn, no leads, of course. In position gets to barrel for b66, but they check this time. And here, if our only bet size is b66, then we do pure check pocket sevens, it looks like. And I think what I was missing here was that we still do get here with some 5 deuce suited, 4 deuce suited. So I guess those are our main bluff combos, 5-4 off as well, 5-4 suited. So we do have enough weaker showdown value combos in our range to be bluffing here with than a hand like pocket sevens. So important to keep that in mind. Sometimes can be tricky when you're playing on multiple tables and, you know, not accounting for every variable. But I think even seeing this in Wizard is just a good reminder that we can clearly have this stuff in range, and those are our river bluffs. And let's go on to the next hand. Here we have 9-8 of hearts in the cutoff facing a hijack open. We flat and the blinds fold. We see a king 6-3 rainbow board with the king of hearts, and opponent goes b33, it looks like. And I thought this spot was close, and I ended up folding, but specifically because I thought, given these positions, I thought there was enough stronger stuff in our range that we had to continue with here. And obviously hijack's range is going to be stronger than like a cutoff's range, for instance, even. But let's take a look. So here it looks like hijack's optimal c-bet size is 82%. But, well, let's take a look at what we do against an 82% c-bet. If we do have 9-8 suited, looks like we're folding. It looks a little bit close, though. If we look at the pot share of 9-8 of hearts, for instance, it's negative 0.4 for a call, so less than 0.5% of the pot. So what that suggests to me is that if we do put in a significantly smaller size, probably we're going to need to be continuing with that combo, but could be wrong. Let's take a look. So here we face a B33 size, and yeah, obviously we need to be doing a lot more calling against this size, and it looks like still pretty close. Not a big mistake to be folding here, actually. With the 9-8 of hearts, we see there's like a fringe amount of folds, and the pot share is only 0.3% when we do call. So calling probably better. I don't feel like this is a blunder. I'm not really going to worry about it too much, but I think looking at this will kind of help internalize where these thresholds are. And let's just scurry on to the next one. All right, here we open ace king off in the low jack. And the big blind calls, we're around 150 bigs deep. We get a king 10 deuce rainbow. I go for a b67 c-bet, and they call. We get 3 of hearts, and this is another example of where I decided to go pot instead of an overbet because I went b67 on flop instead of a smaller bet size on flop, which is a pretty general heuristic, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a small overbet here either. But we do go pot, and they call. And the river is the jack of diamonds. They check again, and here I tanked for a while and decided to make a possibly nitty check back, and we ended up winning against king queen. So my main question is, do we have a value bet here on the river? And let's take a look. Okay, here's another example of where I think going larger is decent with non-big anti-ranges, but it looks like just going B25 or B26 with range here is good. Let's see if we do lose pot share though with the B67 size. Here we can see our pot share is 73.8. So we lose a fair amount, not a ton. For the purposes of this review, I'm going to take a look at the line after going B67. However, one good takeaway, because it's come up a couple times now, is that since the big blind has such a weaker range in these games because they have to defend so much wider, there are more spots where we just go B25 with range with our in-position c-betting range. So anyway, in this line, yeah, we're basically pure betting with ace-king. They call, turn is the 3 of hearts. And so it actually looks like here we do get an overbet. This looks like probably a 2e size. So that does make sense on such a low blank card when we have such a range advantage. And especially when there's, yeah, 2 broadways on the board. Again, not surprised to see this. I think probably not a huge EV difference between B100 and B138, but good to see. And let's take a look at after we go B138 and they call, and we get a jack of diamonds river. If we look at our ace-king combos, they can occasionally go for value, but mostly they check back. So it is kind of refreshing to see that I was not being a huge nit there by checking. And it looks like we have 2 more hands to get through, so let's just move on to the next one. Here we have pocket 7s again. Under the gun min raises, we call, and the blinds fold. Here we get a king 8-6 board with 2 clubs, and opponent goes B33, it looks like. And here I decided to go for a raise with my 7s. And we do get the fold, but I was curious if we actually get to include this in a raising range or not. So let's take a look. So out of position goes B33 with a very high frequency here. That probably has something to do with the fact that we're not as deep as normal. I'm not going to dive into that right now, but that would be my guess. And if we look at button's response, actually surprised to see only 2.8% raises. Again, I suspect this has something to do with the fact that we are shallower than normal. I would expect this raise frequency to go up a bit as we get deeper. And I personally was expecting to usually raise my 6s and 8s, and therefore, you know, needing to fill out that value range with potentially some combos like 7s with a club. If we look at the pocket 7s, we can see there's a small sliver of raises with the club and not without the club, but I think it's clearly better to just be calling in this situation. So yeah, I think main takeaway here is probably do less raising in position with these ranges as we get shallower. And let's move on to the final hand of the video. Here we're 3-handed and we open jack 8 off in the button. Small blind calls, big blind folds. We get a 10-6-3 rainbow board. I decided to go for an overbet here. In hindsight, I realize now that I think this is an overbet spot against big blind, but probably not against small blind. So I think not to make excuses, but yeah, I was probably getting tired at the end of the session and just made this oversight. But we can take a look and see. Maybe it's still a thing. I don't know. We turn the 9 of spades, and I choose to check back here. Usually continuing with a spade was my idea. And river, I had a decision here as well. I was trying to figure out whether I needed to bluff this combo or not. I think having the 8 is potentially okay, except I expect them to mostly bet their 8-7s on river. And I ended up deciding that I thought there was enough weaker stuff in our range to bluff with here that we didn't need to bet with jack 8. So we do end up checking back and losing to 7-6, but let's take a look. Okay, yeah, as we can see here, against small blind, our size is B67. Jack 8 pretty much evenly mixes between bet and check. We went for a bet. Turn is the 9 of spades. We can go for, let's just call it B100 with our turn c-bet size. And if we take a look at our Jack 8 combos, it looks like Jack 8 with a spade, pretty much pure bets. There is some mixing with some of the other combos, but Jack of Hearts, 8 of Diamonds, which is the one I have, pure checks effectively. So we do go for the check, and we get the 10 of clubs. Out of position gets a B25 and B150 betting range, but they check. And yeah, here let's take a look first at in position's betting strategy. Interesting, we just have one size here, basically just a B67 size. Probably because we are somewhat capped since we didn't bet the turn and our opponent's not necessarily capped. So generally when both of those things are true, we don't really get super huge sizes. But we do have hands that are strong enough that want to go for a big-ish bet, trips, and so on. So it actually looks like we do often want to be bluffing with Jack 8 here, and even Queen 8 and some Queen Jack combos. And what's interesting is that if we look at, let's say 5-4, which is a combo that I thought would be a pretty natural bluff just because it's like absolute bottom of our showdown value range here, that actually pure checks and just doesn't really go for the bluff. And so what must be going on here is that it's probably a small effect because there's still plenty of checking and these hands seem to be pretty indifferent. But probably the 8 and or Jack and or Queen block some of their calling range. And so that's why we prioritize bluffing with those combos over the 5-4 combos. And often in a spot of narrower ranges, we do want to prioritize having blockers as opposed to just like starting with lowest showdown value stuff to bluff with. And usually the opposite is true in very wide range situations. So let's take a quick look and see if we can kind of verify that. If we do go B67 here and we take a look at some of our opponent's calls, they have Queen 9 here. So obviously like the Queen 8 blocks that. They sometimes call with Ace 8, like this tiny sliver of 8-7. So again, this is going to be like not a big effect because as we see, like Jack 8, for instance, was nowhere near a pure bluff. But even the fact that there is some fringe effect makes the difference in a spot like this. So that was the last hand I tagged in that session. And I will wrap things up here. Let me know what y'all think. If you have any questions, comments, I would love to hear them. And I will see you in the next one.